The Big 12's a mess, and we love it. Welcome into the Voice of College Football for the best in discussion, debate, and analysis. Appreciate you stopping by to talk about the Big 12 and tiebreaker scenarios all over the place. Of course, last weekend, BYU lost to Arizona State. BYU 2 weeks ago was an undefeated football team. They've now lost twice in conference, so that brings them down to a tie with Iowa State and Arizona State at 6-2. Also keep in mind that Colorado is 6-2 in the conference, so there's a four-way tie for first place, although Colorado's got a third loss outside the conference in losing to Nebraska. So we've got a four-way tie for first place, and then we've got a number of teams at 5-3, as you see right there with the conference standing. So those 5-3 teams, if they win, they can elevate. If more than two teams lose at 6-2, so if three of those 6-2 teams lose, that would open up the opportunity for a 5-3 team to possibly sneak in at a 6-3 after a win this weekend. So let's check out and go right to the source, the Big 12 website, to see what those tiebreaker scenarios are. Then let's look at the college football playoff, because that's the ultimate goal, is to, of course, win the Big 12 championship, because we're so invested in conference championships these days, of course. But the conference champion should make it to the college football playoff. That was at one point a given, that the Power 4 conference champions which of course would make it to the playoffs, but that's not necessarily even a given. But it should be okay, and the winner of the Big 12 should be in the playoff. But it looks like this right now. Two-team tie scenarios, with those two teams being at 7-2. They obviously would play in the conference championship game. If we've got three teams that are tied, this is how it would look. With the Colorado loss this weekend, then you've got an Arizona State-Iowa State game. So even if BYU wins, as long as Arizona State and Iowa State win, they will play in the conference championship game. If Arizona State loses to Arizona, then you've got an Iowa State-BYU conference championship game. If Iowa State loses to K-State, then Arizona State's going to play BYU. They just played last weekend. They will play in the conference championship game. Now, if we've got the scenario that BYU lost, but the other three won, if Texas Tech defeats West Virginia, and you may ask, what does that have to do with anything? That game, those teams aren't in contention. Well, it starts to break down into common opponents within the conference, and it gets messy. So if Colorado, Arizona State, and Iowa State all win, but BYU loses, if Texas Tech defeats West Virginia, then if Baylor defeats Kansas State and Cincinnati beats TCU, then Colorado State, Iowa State will play in the Big 12 championship game. Otherwise, it's Colorado taking on Arizona State. If West Virginia wins the game against Texas Tech, then it's Arizona State and Iowa State. Good Lord. If there's a four-team tie, meaning all the teams that are tied for first place in the conference right now, Arizona State, Iowa State, BYU, and Colorado, Arizona State would take on Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game. I brought this up at the beginning of the video. Any of these 5-3 teams that we see right there entering the week, they, of course, have to win their game to get to 6-3. And then they've got to root for at least three of the 4 6-2 teams to get a loss to drop down to 6-3. Can you imagine if all these 6-2 teams lose to drop to 6-3, and then these 5-3 teams elevate with a win to go to 6-3? We could have a massive tie at the top. So we can't go through all the conference scenarios here. The conference website doesn't even go through all the scenarios. They basically say additional updates will be available, because we also have to consider the schedule. So on Friday at noon Eastern Time, Oklahoma State plays Colorado. So Colorado will either maintain contention and stay in the race with a win, or they will remove themselves. So by Friday afternoon, we'll know, okay, Colorado's still in play or they are out of play. Then on Saturday, again, the way these games are scheduled also factors into the relevance of the games later in the day. West Virginia, Texas Tech, as we just learned, could factor in if any of these teams falter. In particular, a BYU loss with the other three teams winning then means the Texas Tech West Virginia game factors in. Arizona State, Arizona is obviously a huge game. Arizona State's got the inside track. They've got the most inside track to the Big 12 championship game, followed by Iowa State taking on Kansas State. But that's a difficult game. The Wildcats still mathematically have a shot as one of those 5-3 teams in the conference, 8-3 overall. Houston and BYU, and we see BYU with a loss with the other three teams winning open up all those avenues for that Texas Tech West Virginia scenario. Now, what about the college football playoff? Going into last weekend, the Big 12 was in decent shape to possibly get a second team in, although it was still a less than 50-50 proposition. But the SEC lost 3 bubble teams. So 3 bubble teams from the SEC over the weekend, Texas A&M, Alabama, and Ole Miss, all lost. The Big 12 failed to take advantage, though. BYU, Arizona State, somebody had to lose that game, of course. But the big loss was Colorado falling to 8-3. Had Colorado defeated Kansas, then it really would have put the Big 12 in better position to possibly get 2 teams into the college football playoff. As it stands right now, the Big 12 should just be happy that 1 team makes the college football playoff. Worst case scenario here for the Big 12 would be that one of these teams this weekend that loses, one of the Big 4 at the top, loses but still makes the conference championship game, then wins the conference championship game to be a 10-3 football team and be compared to a Boise State team that is 12-1. 12-1, 10-3, not a good comparison for the Big 12 considering Boise State right now is at number 11 in the country in the college football playoff rankings. For the Big 12, Arizona State is now the highest ranked Big 12 team. Who would have thought it back in August? Arizona State now at 9-2 goes up from 21 to 16, followed by Iowa State at number 18, BYU at 19. Then you've got Colorado dropping all the way to number 25 and Kansas State at 24. Colorado actually, despite being 1 spot lower than Kansas State because they lost the head-to-head to Kansas State. I'm sure that's what the committee is weighing in. Colorado with a better shot of getting to the Big 12 championship game. What is weighing in very heavily here against the Big 12? Look at Tulane out of the American Conference. Tulane's got a game against Memphis, a pretty highly regarded team, a good team, this weekend. Then Tulane will play in the American Conference Championship game against an Army team that has been knocked out of the rankings, but certainly is still given some weight by the College Football Playoff Committee because before they lost to Notre Dame, they were at number 19, and they are 9-1. So could Tulane hold off? Worst case scenario, that a non-ranked Big 12 team actually ends up going to the Big 12 championship game and winning. That would be worst case scenario. Worst case scenario out of a ranked situation would be Colorado at number 25 being compared to a Tulane team that is currently 8 spots ahead of them. And Colorado would just have a win against Oklahoma State and then let's say a Big 12 championship game against Iowa State. So consider that. You got the other 3 major conference champions. You've got Boise State out of the Mountain West, and you've got Tulane, who is, again, 1 spot higher than Iowa State right now, 1 spot below Arizona State, and also several spots ahead of the likes of Kansas State and Colorado, and then any other team that could win the Big 12. And Tulane's playing some decent competition in Memphis and Army. Could the College Football Playoff Committee actually have 2 group of 5 champions above the Big 12 champion? Based on what they presented us on Tuesday night, it is possible. Wild and crazy stuff in the Big 12. Hope that your highest ranked team, Arizona State, just completes the run, beats Arizona, wins the Big 12 championship, and elevates into that top 4 seed and gets the bye and maintains some stability and some prestige for the Big 12 and avoid embarrassment. Your comments and questions down below. All sorts of scenarios are possible on the table. Be locked in here at the Voice of College Football because we will talk it up like nobody else. We appreciate your liking the video. Please subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football.